So she is the author of the final revival of Opal and Nev, which was named one of 2021's best novels. So this was done. So NPR, Washington Post, and most importantly, Barack Obama all said it was one of their favorite books of 2021, which is a pretty big deal. So Walton is a fiction writer, a journalist who explores identity, place, and the influence of pop culture. She has won fellowships in the MacDowell Colony and the Tin House Summer Workshop. In 2018, she earned her MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop, and she has worked as an executive level editor for magazine and multimedia brands, including Essence, Entertainment Weekly, Getty Images, and Life. So Dawnie was born and raised here in this beautiful city of Jacksonville, Florida. And she currently lives in Brooklyn, New York with her family. Thank you so much for coming and welcome back to Jax.
Thank you.
And I also want to introduce you to our wonderful moderator for tonight, Nikisha Elise Williams. She is a two-time Emmy Award-winning producer, an award-winning author, and the producer and host of the Black and Published podcast. So her latest novel, Beyond Bourbon Street, was awarded Best Fiction by the Black Caucus of African American Librarians in 2021 in the Self-Published eBook Literary Awards. Beyond Bourbon Street was also a winner of the 2020 Outstanding Book Award from the National Association of Black Journalists. So Nikisha is a Chicago native, very important to remember, but she now lives in Jacksonville, Florida with her family. You can find her writing in several publications, including the Washington Post, Essence, and Vox. Thank you so much for being here, Nikisha, and I leave the rest to you.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Let's get started.
Yes.
All right, so you got lots of people out in the audience.
I see some faces I have not seen since the 90s. Can I shout out my Stanton classmates? Hi, Jing. Hi, Joyce. Hi, Jenny. Hi, Kimmy. Wow. And some neighbors of my grandparents.
Shout them all out.
Yes, the Purdy's, and my parents are here. I mean, this has always been a piece of the dream, to be able to come to Jacksonville and have my family here. And we haven't been able to do that, so this is very special to be here.
So then let's start the story in the interview in Jacksonville. What did all these people who are here in the audience that supported you, helped raise you, nurture you, were friends to you, what did you take from them as you began your writing career?
Wow. Well, it starts with my family. Very close family, a music-loving family and an artistic family. So I was just at my dad's yesterday and looking at his record collection. I just got married last year, and we had made a video with I Choose You by Willie Hutch, and my dad was like, I have this record, a Willie Hutch album. But it was always music everywhere. I remember growing up with Stevie Wonder and Marvin Gaye. My mom talks a lot about What's Going On being kind of a seminal record of that time, of the 1970s. And my grandparents loved jazz. And then my grandfather was a visual artist who was a draftsman and sort of translated his artistry into a profession, you know. And so I was always very much encouraged to read. My love of reading, you know, there were books everywhere. Both my grandmothers were big readers, and my grandfather, Howard Falk, loved poetry. So I was always surrounded by words as well. And when I started writing, that was also something that was very much encouraged. You know, I had cousins who played sports, and my grandparent, you know, that was kind of easy to sort of show off. You go to the games, whatever. But I was a reader, and I remember my grandfather once, we had cousins in town from LA, and he was like, read this. And I was 8 years old, and it was a Time magazine with Lee Iacocca on the cover. So I had no idea what I was reading, but, you know, I was just sort of reading those things. And when I went to college, I was always thinking, how can I kind of professionalize this love? And so that's how I turned to journalism. And, I did that career for a very long time. And as far as going to Stanton, I met so many amazing people and amazing writers, and I kind of fell in with I don't know, what were like the alternative kids, I guess we were, and so we would go on the weekends to this old club at the beach called Einstein A Go-Go. It was an all ages club, and sort of loving that music, and but trying to reconcile loving that music with who I was becoming as a Black woman. And so a lot of that was on my mind when I was writing the book. Yeah.
Did you always want to cover music and entertainment, even in journalism, before you got to your fiction?
Oh, yeah. I always wanted to, I loved music so much, and I feel like when I was in high school, I was already getting Rolling Stone and was interested in spin and all of that. And so that was kind of always the goal. And we just loved, we were just sort of an entertainment-loving family. we Don't Kill Me, Mama. We ate dinner in front of the TV,
It's fine. It's fine.
That's just Thursday night lineups and all of that. And I always saw those things, pop culture, as a reflection of what's going on with us. And so it was always kind of deeply interesting to me. So that was always kind of what I wanted to get into, was arts journalism.
So then in seeing pop culture as a reflection of what was going on, but then also feeling kind of othered because you like this indie alternative punk kind of music, how did you reconcile those two things within yourself as you move forward?
It was difficult. Because I did love that music so much, but it was so rare that I saw images of myself in it. And there were bands like Bad Brains and Living Color, that were men that were out there and making strides in that. But there weren't a lot of women that I knew of, and that's the key, is that I didn't know of them. They were always sort of hidden figures that I didn't learn about until later. And I think how I came to reconcile it is I ended up going to Florida A&M, which I think was a really big decision for me. I'm going to an HBCU. And I always say that I felt there were pieces of me that were kind of fragmented, and I didn't know how to hold it all together until I went to an HBCU and met lots of other kids who were kind of into those things that I thought was weird for me to like, And once I met them and understood that I could be everything and still be a Black woman and a proud Black woman, and understand also the roots of rock and roll, and to understand that there are so many Black folks kind of at the heart of so much of culture, was an important thing to know. And I feel like even now, after the book has come out, I have people say, oh, have you heard of this artist and that artist? And I'm still learning all the time about all these figures.
So do you feel like there was a part of you that was maybe writing the character of Opal Jewel all along, even though you didn't know it because you were trying to find her?
Yes. And I often say, people ask me, well, how long did it take you to write the book? And it's a complicated answer for me because I started writing it in 2013, but in some ways I feel like it's a book that I was sort of writing all my life as I was kind of processing different things. And I always say that Opal for me was the kind of rock star that, I would have loved to pin to my bedroom wall very proudly, In some ways, she is like a superheroine for me, someone who walked through the world with that confidence at all times.
So now that we're here, we're going to talk about the book.
Okay, let's do it.
I said this to you before. Those opening pages, when you're describing Opal and who she is to the people around her and the people that she's connected to, it's a very unapologetic, observational characterization with a few bad words. But it adds to the color of who she is. Did you see her as clearly in your mind as you were beginning the story and drafting the novel as she comes across on the page?
I think that when I started, I had a picture of her in my head, and it got more complicated the deeper into the novel I wrote. So my elevator pitch, before I knew what the story was or who the characters were, I would say, to someone, I'm working on this thing. I don't know what it is. I don't know who these characters are. But imagine if Grace Jones and David Bowie made music together in 1970s New York City. And as I started getting to know her a little bit better, that began to have like more colors and more textures. But, it started with Grace in terms of the style and the boldness and the strangeness. I was even thinking about Boomerang, Grace Jones Stranger in the commercials, you know what I mean? I was thinking about that a lot. And as I started doing reading and more research and sort of understanding the things that might have put her in a spotlight and how her and Nev might have become infamous, I guess, in a way, then it got more complicated. And thinking about her as a solo artist added more layers to it. And thinking about the trajectory of her career as opposed to Nev's added more color to it. And so then I was looking at other figures like Nona Hendrix. I was thinking about Betty Davis, all kinds of Nina Simone, all of these artists kind of added to her and complicated her.
Why did you think you had to have a Nev, or did you want to have a Nev? Because you know how I feel about Nev at this point. Me and Nev don't go together. I'm not here for Nev, but it's your book. He's there.
Yeah.
So why does he have to be there?
Well, I think so. The idea sparked when I was watching 20 Feet from Stardom, which I don't know if anyone's seen it, but it's a documentary. It's about background singers. Mm-hmm. It's about primarily Black women whose voices but you don't necessarily know their faces or their names, but they kind of add so much to the songs. And, there's so much in that movie about why not them? Mm-hmm. Why not Mary Clayton? Why Mick Jagger? You know what I mean? And so I think that as in most things, most fields, patriarchal and white, white men are the ones with the power to kind of have labels take a chance on them and have changeable careers, things like that. And so, I felt he was sort of necessary in that way. And I just also thought it was interesting to look at that era. Where we were sort of coming out of what we think of traditionally as the capital civil rights movement and into sort of a more, Black Power, Black Panthers kind of, to have that kind of tension between those two artists was interesting to me. But really, to get back to 20 Feet from Stardom, at the beginning of that film, they show footage from a Talking Heads concert. And I've always loved Talking Heads. This is one of my favorite groups. And you see, David Byrne at center stage. And he's just so odd, and he's sort of, when I was a kid, Burning Down the House was a big hit, and Once in a Lifetime. And so there was a lot that I recognized from that, but then the camera pans over and you see his background singers, and they're two Black women who look like my mother, with the bright red lips and just so beautiful and joyful. And I just wanted to pull one of them to center stage with him. There was something in that dynamic that interested me. And I wanted to kind of follow that through in a realistic way and see what would happen to bring these two people together who seem like opposites, and then how they would fall apart.
I have two questions. So in referencing 20 Feet from Stardom, I've seen the documentary. There's a line that one of the artists says about, when you take that walk, It's not that far, but it's a long walk and it's intimidating.
Yeah.
And in crafting the story of Opal and Nev and them fighting to take their walk, because where they all fall apart is when they finally get their chance. Why was it important for you to make that the climax, of one of the many climaxes of the novel, really?
That's a really good question. You're talking about the Rivington showcase scene. I thought, and this is, nobody's asked this before, but I'm really glad you did, because one of the things that people say to me always is that this book felt so real that they were going to Google, right? And I wanted to keep...
Same.
I wanted to keep that sense of reality, and the sad truth of it is that I don't know that they would have made headlines the way they did had, and no spoilers for those who haven't read it, if that event had not occurred. I don't know that they would have naturally together or Opal separate making that kind of music if they would have exploded in the way that they do for that brief moment. And so I knew that I wanted to have them in the headlines for a news event and for an event that got a lot of attention and was very controversial. And I was thinking about also, there's a photo that kind of puts them on the map and makes them famous. And I was thinking about iconic photography. I'm very much into photography. So I was thinking about Kent State and that image of the girl screaming over the body in the street. And kind of how it captures the nation's attention, and it sort of is a visual marker of something. And so that's why they wouldn't have gotten famous just because they've released an album that's good. That wouldn't have been enough. Yeah.
Okay. And you've talked about this before, that the book is driven by the oral history, and that you fell in love with reading oral history, so you tried your hand at it. Was it always your intent in crafting their oral history to make it around race and social justice and the issues of the time, as well as the issues that transfer to now?
It was always going to be an oral history, because I love that form, because it instantly gives whatever the topic is a kind of iconic status. Because it's here's this thing that everybody has an opinion about, and there are conflicting takes on it, and the memories are different, and the stories are rich and sometimes funny and sometimes enraging. All of those things, I think, is why I wanted to make an oral history. I was writing big chunks of this book at a time of high anxiety for, I think, everybody. I was really deep in late 2015, going into 2016. I was writing the Rivington showcase scene right around November 2016, when I was living in Iowa in graduate school in a red state. And all of that kind of just came out on the page as my processing. And I remember election night, my mom will remember this, calling her in tears. And my mother telling me, it's bad. Yes, I know it's bad, but we have been here before. That she remembered, she knew how I felt. And it was just a reminder that, I could say history is cyclical, but in a lot of ways, history, we've progressed somewhat, but there are still things that have not been acknowledged, and so we're sort of in the same place going forward. And so it was a lot of thinking through that, and just realizing that for an artist like Opal, it can't ever just be about the music for her. It's always going to be about what's going on in the culture, in the politics, because she feels part of her community, and she feels like she's taking her community with her wherever she is in the spotlight. And so it was kind of impossible not to have it be part of the book, everything that was going on. And it was interesting how the two time frames were mirroring each other in terms of it being sort of very tumultuous times, volatile times.
So, and I like what you said about having one event with people having conflicting points of view, but then also for Opal, she couldn't just be about the music, which brings us to another pivotal character in the book, no spoilers, Chet Bond.
Yeah.
And so I feel like his character, we know it's a riff for all the Jacksonville folks. It's on Leonard Skinner,
Yeah.
which was from this area and what they stood for. But having them, that juxtaposition of those two characters and the meeting up at the Therivington showcase and their stories being so intertwined, I guess it reminded me of how, all of our stories are intertwined like this, especially in this country. Like, you can't talk about one without talking about the other.
Yeah.
Why was it important for you to make that moment at the Therivington showcase and the issue in which everything falls apart about and it becomes this big moment? Why was that so pivotal? Because I know it was around the time of, the kneeling protest with Colin Kaepernick and all those different things.
Mm-hmm. So the use of the Confederate flag, I think that was just me kind of riffing on being from here, So Leonard Skinner, they were graduates of the former Robert E. Lee High School. Congratulations on that, changing names, by the way. Yeah. That was my neighborhood school. Like, if I didn't go to Stanton, I would have been at Robert E. Lee.
And they were the generals, correct?
Yes. That was their alma mater. And I just remember, people here, of course, having some pride in them being from here, but just the T-shirts with the Confederate flag and all of that. And it was always so unsettling to me. And I think that, but the thing is, I've lived a lot of different places. My journalism career took me to many different cities, and I lived out west for a time. I lived in Portland, Oregon. And I was driving to Seattle from Portland and got a flat tire and was towed to a gas station in Washington State that was plastered in the Confederate flag. Oof. And so I'm like, okay, I'm not at home. This isn't the South. What is this about? And it is just an image. I'm very sort of interested in images and the meaning and the power of imagery. And that goes from the Confederate flag to the image of Black women in media. And I write a lot about that having to do with Opal. But, I was very interested in Bree Newsom climbing that flagpole and pulling down the flag. That was happening around the time, that I was writing the book. Even after I finished writing the book, watching January 6th unfold and seeing the Confederate flag march through the Capitol. It was just something that I was interested in exploring. And I felt the early 1970s was sort of the time when Southern rock was emerging, and it was very tied up in that kind of imagery. But it was also a time of other emerging musical forms. Like, you had the Laurel Canyon scene coming, and you had conscious soul music, and you had proto-punk being a thing. And I was interested in the collision of all those different musical forms at a single concert, and seeing what would happen when those kinds of things were in tension together in one physical, literally together in one space. And that's how it came about.
You talked about, the importance of Black women in media, and that goes to the beginning of the novel and the thread throughout the contemporary timeline with Sonny Shelton and her being in media. Was that fun for you to write, drawing on your own experience in media and then giving it to this character who's tied to this iconic rock star who's been her benefactor all her life and she didn't really know?
Yeah. Well, that came in very late in the writing of the book. I had written probably 2/3 of a draft with no Sonny at all. It was just the straight oral histories. And then when I went to graduate school and I started workshopping the book, my students said, my fellow
Colleagues,
classmates. They said, well, we really like this, but we're curious about who's on the other side of the recorder. Who are they talking to? And how is she reacting to what they're saying? And so that's how Sonny began to develop. And it's very funny. My husband actually said to me, there's a lot of you in this character. And I was like, what are you talking about? No, there's not. There's not. And he said, are you kidding? Her name is Sonny. Your name is Dawnie. Like, what are you talking about? And so I did find that I was putting on my journalist hat a lot when I was writing those parts, those Sonny parts. And for me, that is always kind of a critical lens on everything. Being a little bit skeptical, being a little analytical, and also just having the fun of saying, because it wouldn't be so easy for a real life journalist just to talk to all these people, and so it was fun in a fictional world just to say, who would I want to hear from now if I were Sonny, and just put them in.
Yeah, that's where we have to start Googling to make sure that this didn't really happen in real life. Like, wait, what? When Opal goes to Paris, it gives very much Josephine Baker vibes. Yeah. Was that an inspiration for you in her story for
Absolutely.
when Opal goes away for a while?
Yeah, it was Josephine Baker, it was James Baldwin, and both of them are mentioned in that chapter. That was sort of a point where I wanted to give Opal a little rest. I loved her. And I was grieving for her, and I worried about her like she was real. And I wanted to give her a moment to herself to process everything that had happened. I wanted to give her a worldview outside of America. I wanted her to make some decisions for herself. As to whether she was going to stay over there or whether she was going to come home. For me, that chapter was about her maturing and growing into her voice. And so I was very attached to that chapter. I very much, it was very close to my heart. And it was important for me that I gave her that rest and that luxury.
The end of the book is equally triumphant as it is unsettling with what happens between the reunion of Opal and Neb and their final revival. Why did you leave it as joyful as it is in the end, but it still feels ominous? Why did you leave it in that kind of moody space?
Again, feeling real. Always wanting it to feel real from beginning to end. I didn't know how I was going to end this book, and that's why it took me so long to write. I got to the middle and got stuck, after that big revelation that happens at the halfway point. I was like, I don't know what happens, and I have to take a whole semester off to figure out what happens. But I always knew the tone of what I wanted the ending to be, and I wanted her to, no spoilers, but I wanted her to be at peace. And that was kind of it. You know what I mean? Like, I sort of leave it to the reader to kind of imagine what happens after that. There's a little detail in footnotes, as to what happens. But I just wanted it to feel real. And I think even in our victories, there's still ways to go, I mean, today is a beautiful day. Justice Jackson confirmed, which is a beautiful thing. A beautiful thing, but, it doesn't solve everything, you know what I mean? There's still so much to do, so long to go, and I think that's the note that I wanted to end on. Yeah.
I didn't know that you took a break between part 1 and part 2.
I did, yes.
And so, because part 1, it has one rhythm, but then part 2 is like kicked up a notch. So when you came back to it after the big revelation and you get to the second half of the book, the tone shifts. People, like, the facades come down, they start being their real selves. What was it that you had to go through in your process of writing when you got stuck to get out of that rut and then to come back with new energy that you infused into the book and on the page?
Whew. So, the writing the Rivington showcase scene took a lot out of me. It was as surprising to me as a writer as it was to the reader, that moment, because I didn't know that it was coming. I was just writing, and I was like, kept writing, and then it happened, and I was like
this doesn't feel good.
And then I think that I was sort of, well, first of all, I was kind of grieving ideas of the book that I had already, because I knew it was moving into this other space that was intimidating because it felt really big. And so I had to take some time to process that. And I ended up, what did I do? I wrote other things. You know, I wrote a couple of short stories. I tried beginnings of other stuff. I read a lot. And I ended up writing several different versions, ultimately, of that second half of the book. I revised it a lot. Even after I got my agent and all that started happening, I was revising it very heavily. And I just knew that, like, Opal was going to come into sharper focus, you know? And it took me a while to get there because I was thinking, and this is after I got my agent, you know, he was sort of encouraging me to do that. I was still kind of like trying to tell both of their stories in kind of an equal way. And he was like, you want to write about Opal, write about Opal. It's about Opal. And so it took some time to come to that realization. So it was a process. It definitely was a process. Yeah.
In all that you've gone through to bring this book to life and all that you had to let go to also bring it to life, what do you want your readers and your audience to take from it?
Oh, that's a big question. I would be happy if the reader sort of is thinking a little bit more deeply and critically about images. And I would like, for me, the book is also just about the importance of having community, of having your people with you. And that's why it was so important to kind of have, you know, that final scenes being, you know, Opal and Sonny and Virgil together in that diner. Like, I knew when I was reaching that scene, I was like, here's my ending. This is the ending. And I think, yeah, that's really the thing, is that for me, the book is about, it's about community, it's about love, it's about standing true to what you believe in. Mm-hmm. And it's also a book about the complicated nature of ambition. You know, I think that's the one thing that Opal and Nev have in common, is that they both are incredibly ambitious, but for one character will do anything for that ambition and the other won't. Mm. And it would be interesting for the reader to think about that too, I thought.
You open this door. So how does your own ambition inform what you're doing and what you're doing next? So it's really hard to write a second novel after. I mean, I've been very blessed with this book. It's been widely read. It's done very well.
But I think that the reason why I think this novel has done well is because it is very true to who I am. And so I always want to make sure that the next thing I'm doing feels true in some way to who I am or whatever life stage I'm kind of going through. And so I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about, you know, being 45 years old, and I'm thinking about friendship over time. You know, I'm thinking about all of those things. Mm-hmm. And I think that the only thing that kind of keeps me going back to the page is the passion that I have for it, and just trying to like believe in that and believe in myself, and not try to like write toward any trend or anything that I think is gonna sell, you know what I mean? Because I think it just wouldn't be that authentic coming from me. So just trying to like keep a clear vision.
And I think now it's time for audience questions.
It sure is. Okay, everyone, we're just gonna pause because we are going to start our audience Q&A session. So for those of you in the audience here at Highlands Library, under some of your seats, we actually had a bigger crowd than we expected. So you might have to borrow a piece of paper from your friend. You can write your questions down and we will be picking them up. And for those of you in the Zoom audience, you can just type your questions into the chat and we will get them over to our speakers. All right. You got your first two questions already.
Okay. The first question is no spoilers, but do you know if Nev was lying?
I do know. Of course I know.
Did you always know Nev was going to turn out like that when you were...
No.
Okay.
No, that's what I was saying. When I wrote that scene, when Chet makes the revelation, I sat back. I was in Iowa in my attic apartment, sitting at this table in front of a big picture window, and I wrote that part, and I said, "Oh no!" And I sat back in my chair and was like, "Oh," and I grieved, like, because it broke my heart.
I think I literally screamed. I was
Yeah.
like, what?
Yeah, Robert Jones Jr., who's another writer, he was reading it and sending me texts at the time, and he marked his book all up and like put exclamation points on the page.
I got him.
With like curse words.
We're the same. What is your book's relationship to Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid?
Yeah. Taylor and I actually did an online event together. So Daisy Jones and the Six is a book that came out, I think, in 2019, and it's also written in the oral history style, and it is sort of based on Fleetwood Mac. It's kind of, you know, loosely fictionalized version of Stevie Nicks. And I had finished this novel, and we were about to go out on submission to editors when I read in the New York Times that there is this book coming called Daisy Jones and the Six. And I read the description, and it said, it's a fictional oral history about a 1970s woman rock star. And I said, what? And I kind of hyperventilated for a while. My husband had to calm me down, said it was okay. But what I have found is that people who have read both books have really loved them both in different ways, and they're very different books. That one is definitely more of a romance, whereas mine is sort of more weaving in of history and taking on race and gender in popular culture, that kind of thing. So they're different books. Daisy Jones is a really fun fun book. And Taylor was very generous because she's hugely successful. She sells a lot of books and was very gracious in moderating an event that I did for Opal and Nev. So she's fantastic. She's really great. Yeah.
Okay. What advice do you have for young, up-and-coming writers?
Yeah, read a lot, read widely. Fiction, nonfiction, newspapers. You never know how your ideas are going to spark. So I would say that, and I would say, bouncing off what I just said about leaning into your own obsessions, what interests you, because that's the thing that will bring you back to the page, is if you have a deep curiosity about something that you are interested in, and have faith that your interests will interest other people. Yeah.
Why do you think images have power like the Confederate flag in Washington?
I think that images like the Confederate flag, it's a visual shorthand for a lot of stuff behind it. It's a signaling, it's a dog whistling often, which is why, when you're in rural Washington state and seeing the Confederate flag, the heritage and pride thing does not hold up. It does not hold water. And I think that visuals are just, just thinking about news photography, thinking about photography in general. I think that when we see an image, we imagine into it, and we don't know the full story, but there's something powerful that's stirred inside when you see an image and you are kind of you're projecting your own story onto it. One of my favorite jobs was at Life magazine, which was, famous, of course, for decades for its photography, and kind of learning the real story behind images that I thought I knew the story of. We would call in the negatives of famous shoots, and there'd be the photographer's notes on onion skin, and that would give you the real story of things that would happen. But when you look at the image that looks glamorous or looks like it's telling a different tale, it's just the disconnect, you know what I mean? So images definitely have power, and, the images of Black women over the years. When I worked at Essence, we did a whole study about that, about everything from reality television to music videos and all these things, and the images that they put forth, and what people kind of like glean as a whole. Yeah, it's just something I've always really been interested in.
An aside.
Yeah.
When you were at Life, did you ever look up the history in the onion skin for the image from Axe Handle Saturday?
No. Did Life do photography from Axe Handle Saturday?
It was one of the only images.
Wow. No, I didn't. Because this was back in 2008 or something like that. Yeah, no, I should have.
Just curious.
Yeah.
Next question is, how would you describe your revision process? Is it difficult to revise things for you?
Yes. It's very difficult. But a lot of the real writing, I think, happens in revision. The reason revision is hard is because you get attached to certain things that you've written. And in the editing of this book, there was a whole about 50-page section that I was very attached to, that ended up on the cutting room floor.
Wow.
And, it was something my editor said, it's just kind of slowing your book down. You have a very propulsive book, and then it hits this section and it comes to a halt. And I fought it for a long time, and I was like, oh, no, you just don't understand. One day I said, I'm going to prove her wrong. And I cut it out and I put it in a separate file and I pieced the rest of it together and I said, oh no, she's right. She's right. But it was like coming to that understanding that even if on a sentence level it's good writing and it even stands alone as its own section, even if it's beautiful, if it might not fit in this book. It might not be right in that book. And so coming to have that that awakening, it took some time though, because you do get attached to certain things. You want to make sure that you're always fulfilling your intention, which is why I made sure that I didn't find an agent or start talking to editors or anything until I was done with a draft that I was satisfied with, because you have to reach the end and be satisfied with what you've done, and you have to reach the end to understand what you're doing. And so then you know what to fight for, what battles to choose. And that was key for me in the revision process, to be able to push back a little bit on edits, because I knew I need this part to say that, to express this thing that's important to the book. And when I could make an argument like that, my editor was like, oh yeah, of course. You know what I mean? So that is revision for me, is kind of reaching a point where I understand it myself, because the process of drafting is the process of understanding your own work and your own story that you're trying to tell.
The next question is, as a Black woman, what experiences did you draw on to help you inform the essence of Opal's character?
I mean, I wanted her to be cool and messy, like the musicians that, I kind of grew up liking. I wanted her to have a certain confidence that, so that's the one thing that I don't know if it's super realistic, was that Opal was always that confident, from a very young age. She always knew exactly who she was. And that to me was her superpower, but it is also the thing that I think is probably the least realistic in the book. But that was the thing to me that made her larger than life. And what I would have really looked up to and envied when I was a kid growing up. So it wasn't so much things that I experienced, but things that I didn't, in a way that I didn't feel. I gave those qualities to her. As someone that I would have really admired and really wanted to be friends with.
Ooh.
Yeah.
And then I think this is our final question. Was Pearl a character that you included from the beginning, or was she added later? And then what was the impetus, inspiration for adding her?
Pearl was there from the start. She was there from the start. In fact, the first words I ever wrote in the book were sort of Opal and Pearl talking about their childhood. And I love this idea of Opal kind of being a misfit when she was a kid, and Pearl being a better singer, prettier, traditionally prettier, all of those things, And I like them having kind of a complicated relationship and kind of very strongly different takes on the world, on family, on religion, just about every kind of difference you could possibly have, but also still love each other, That was important to me, that they have their tussles, but Pearl loves Opal and Opal loves Pearl, and I hope that that's clear, in the book.
Could Pearl have a standalone story? Don't have to be a long one. It could be a short story. With her and the deacon.
Oh, well, I think you should talk to Disha Philia about that. Another Jacksonville native, by the way, and is another Stantonite, Deisha Filia, who wrote The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. So Pearl is a church lady, very much a church lady. So Deisha would have some things to say about maybe what's going on with Pearl.
Y'all collab. I did.
Yes. Yes.
I think we have one more. Does Opal have a character trait for all of us to emulate?
Ooh. First of all, I do want to say that Opal is very flawed. Like Opal, she is very flawed, but I think that she's very loyal to those she loves. Very loyal. So I think that's one thing, and I think that. There are times in the book where I really admire her unwillingness to compromise on certain things. I'm not saying that's always good, but when it comes to how she is stepping into the world as a political figure with a platform, I think that that is something to admire. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there a reason the characters were named after items used in jewelry?
I just thought it was kind of fun. I liked that she was Opal, her sister was Pearl, their mother was Ruby. And I liked Opal for her because it's such an interesting kind of jewel. Like, you turn it different ways and it has different kind of reflections and refractions, and it's sort of hard to really say exactly what color an opal is, you know, because it's so shaded. And so yeah, that's why I liked Opal for Opal. Yeah.
And someone asked, have you published any of your short stories?
Yes, I published my first short story in the Oxford American. It's a literary journal. It's called The High Shelf. And it's about two elderly ladies living in Jacksonville on the north side who are neighbors and have been frenemies for decades, but then they become like shyly friendly, and kind of what happens around that. And I was thinking about my grandmothers, both my grandmothers, when I wrote that story. Yeah. Yeah.
That's good. Are we good, Imani? Thank you, guys.